The coffee cup sailed through the morning air like a ceramic missile, scalding contents painting a perfect brown arc against the marble walls of Meridian Financial. Victoria Chen watched in horror as gravity claimed her weapon of choice, sending it crashing directly onto the chest of the most expensively dressed man she'd ever encountered. The words erupted from her lips before she could stop them, her laptop bag sliding from her shoulder as she lunged forward with napkins that suddenly felt pathetically inadequate. The man stood frozen, his charcoal suit now decorated with a spreading stain that looked like abstract art painted in espresso. His jaw worked silently, green eyes blazing with the kind of controlled fury that made Victoria's survival instincts scream warnings. She'd seen that look before, in boardrooms where careers went to die. "I am so incredibly sorry," Victoria rushed forward, dabbing frantically at his jacket with paper napkins that dissolved on contact. That absolute moron behind me shoved me right when I was turning around. "I'll pay for cleaning, replacement, whatever you need." He caught her wrists with surprising gentleness, stopping her frantic ministrations. "Do you have any concept of what you've just destroyed?" Victoria swallowed hard, taking in the perfect cut of his suit, the Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than her monthly salary, the watch that gleamed like liquid silver on his wrist. Something expensive? Custom-tailored, Savile Row. 6-month waiting list. His voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Without question? But please, continue telling me how some stranger's rudeness justifies assault with a beverage." Heat flooded Victoria's cheeks, but anger flared alongside embarrassment. "Assault? It was an accident. And maybe if you weren't standing directly in the traffic flow like some kind of menswear mannequin, this wouldn't have happened." Something shifted in his expression, surprise flickering across his features before settling back into that mask of cold control. Fascinating. Most people apologize more than once when they've just ruined a $5,000 suit. 5,000? Victoria's voice cracked on the number. For a suit? That's insane. That's more than some people make in 2 months. Perhaps those people should consider more lucrative career paths. The dismissive tone hit Victoria like a physical blow. She'd been scraping by on freelance consulting work for months, watching her savings evaporate while sending out resumes to companies that treated her. MBA like it was printed on tissue paper. This man's casual arrogance about money made her want to throw something else at him. "You know what? You're right." Victoria stepped back, her chin lifting in defiance. "I clearly can't afford to share oxygen with someone of your elevated status. How thoughtless of me to exist in your general vicinity while being financially inferior." For a moment, something almost like amusement flickered in his eyes, and it was gone, replaced by that same Arctic control. "Miss Chen. Victoria Chen. Ms. Chen." He reached into his jacket pocket, extracting a business card with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. "Since you're so concerned about compensation, perhaps we can arrange something mutually beneficial." Victoria took the card, her fingers brushing his for an instant that sent an unexpected jolt up her arm. The paper felt expensive, naturally, with raised lettering that spelled out a name that made her stomach drop into her shoes. Alexander Meridian, Chief Executive Officer, Meridian Financial Group. She looked up to find him watching her reaction with unmistakable satisfaction. "You work here," she said slowly. "I own here, actually." His smile held all the warmth of a shark's. "And you, Ms. Chen, have just auditioned for a position you didn't know existed?" Victoria's mind reeled. This was Meridian Financial, the company she'd been trying to get an interview with for 3 months. The company whose hiring manager had rejected her application twice without explanation. The company whose CEO she'd just baptized with Colombian roast. "I don't understand." "Report to the 32nd floor tomorrow at 8 a.m. sharp. Ask for my assistant, Margaret. Tell her you're interviewing for the new strategic consultant position." Alexander straightened his tie, somehow managing to look dignified despite the coffee stains spreading across his chest. "Don't be late, Miss Chen. I have a pathological hatred of tardiness." Wait, Victoria's head spun as she tried to process what was happening. "Are you offering me a job? 'Cause I threw coffee on you?" "I'm offering you an opportunity to prove that your talent with financial projections matches your aim with hot beverages." Alexander's eyes held hers with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. Unless, of course, you're too intimidated to work for someone whose clothing budget exceeds your annual income. The challenge in his voice made Victoria's spine straighten. She'd spent months being rejected, overlooked, and patronized by lesser minds in cheaper suits. If this arrogant billionaire wanted to play games, she'd show him exactly what kind of opponent he'd chosen. 8 a.m. sharp, she repeated, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. I'll be there. Excellent. Alexander turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Miss Chen. Where's something coffee-resistant? I'd hate for you to stain yourself during our meeting. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Victoria standing in the lobby holding his business card and wondering if she'd just made the best or worst decision of her life. As the elevator doors closed behind him, one thought echoed in her mind with crystal clarity. Tomorrow was going to change everything. She just had no idea how much. Victoria's reflection stared back at her from the polished elevator doors. A woman trying desperately to look like she belonged in a building where the lobby flowers probably cost more than her rent. She'd chosen her most professional blazer, a deep navy that complemented her dark hair, and shoes that were comfortable enough for standing, but stylish enough to suggest competence. The elevator climbed past floors filled with the city's financial elite, each number on the digital display, making her heart beat faster. By the time it reached 32, Victoria felt like she'd swallowed a live wire. Margaret turned out to be a woman in her 50s, with silver hair swept into an elegant chignon and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of Victoria's appearance in a single glance. Miss Chen, I presume? Margaret's voice carried the slight accent of old money Boston. Mr. Meridian is expecting you. Coffee. Victoria's stomach lurched at the word. No, thank you. I think I've had enough encounters with coffee for 1 week. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Margaret's face. Yes, I heard about yesterday's incident. Dry cleaning managed to save the suit, thankfully, though I suspect that wasn't entirely accidental on your part. It absolutely was accidental, Victoria protested. Of course it was, dear. Margaret's smile suggested she believed nothing of the sort. Right this way. Alexander's office occupied the entire corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Central Park that probably cost more per square foot than most people's homes. The man himself stood silhouetted against the morning, light hands clasped behind his back, perfectly still except for the subtle tension in his shoulders. Ms. Chen, he said, without turning around. Punctual. Appreciate that in an employee. Not your employee yet, Victoria replied, moving to stand beside one of the leather chairs facing his desk. This is still an interview, isn't it? Alexander turned, and Victoria felt that same electric jolt she'd experienced yesterday when their fingers had touched. He'd traded yesterday's ruined suit for one in midnight blue that fit him like it had been painted on. The effect was devastating, and completely unfair. Technically, yes. He moved to his desk, extracting a file folder thick enough to contain a small novel. Tell me, Ms. Chen, what do you know about Meridian Financial? Victoria had spent half the night researching, determined not to embarrass herself more than she already had. Founded 15 years ago by your father, Marcus Meridian, specializes in high-risk, high-reward investment strategies for ultra-high net worth individuals. Last year's revenue exceeded $2 billion, making it one of the fastest-growing firms in the sector. Adequate. Alexander's tone suggested he'd expected more. What you probably don't know is that we're hemorrhaging clients. That stopped Victoria short. I'm sorry, sit. She gestured to the chair, waiting until she complied before continuing. 6 months ago, someone began systematically targeting our most valuable accounts, offering better terms, more personalized service, and strategies specifically designed to counter our approach. We've lost 30% of our portfolio. Victoria frowned, her analytical mind automatically shifting into gear. Industrial espionage? My assumption as well. But our security is impeccable, and the knowledge being used against us is too specific, too current. It's not stolen intelligence. Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Inside. Information. The implications hit Victoria like a physical blow. You think someone on your team is feeding information to a competitor? I don't think it, Ms. Chen. I know it. Alexander opened the file folder, revealing what appeared to be months of documentation. Financial records, client communications, strategic plans. What I don't know is who. Victoria stared at the papers, her mind racing. And you want me to find out? I want you to do what you do best. Analyze patterns, identify inconsistencies, follow the money. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her with those unsettling green eyes. Your academic record suggests you have a talent for seeing connections others miss. You researched me? Heat flooded Victoria's cheeks again. When? The moment. You walked out of this building yesterday. Do you think I make hiring decisions based solely on coffee-throwing ability? The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Your thesis on market manipulation in emerging economies was genuinely impressive. So, was your work at Chen Analytics before the market downturn forced you to downsize? Victoria's embarrassment shifted into something sharper. If you knew my qualifications, why did you make me think this was some kind of impulse decision? Because I wanted to see how you'd react under pressure, how you'd handle uncertainty. Alexander stood, moving around the desk until he was close enough that she could smell his cologne. That's something expensive and subtle that made her pulse quicken. Despite herself, a consultant who can't manage ambiguity is worthless to me. The proximity was doing dangerous things to Victoria's concentration. She forced herself to focus on the folder instead of the way his shirt stretched across his chest when he moved. What's my mandate? Full access to personnel files, financial records, everything except executive level, communications. Those require board approval. Alexander returned to his position by the windows, putting distance between them that Victoria found both relieving and disappointing. You'll report directly to me. No one else knows the true purpose of your employment here. And if I find evidence that someone you trust is betraying you, then I'll handle it accordingly. The coldness in his voice made Victoria shiver. I don't tolerate disloyalty, Miss Chen, from anyone. Something in his tone suggested the warning applied to her as well. Victoria lifted her chin, meeting his. Gaze directly. Neither do I, Mr. Meridian. You'll have my complete discretion and my honest assessment, regardless of what I find. Even if what you find implicates someone you come to care about. The question felt loaded with meaning that Victoria couldn't quite grasp. Especially then. Alexander studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his expression. Then he moved to his desk, withdrawing a contract from the drawer. Your salary will be $300,000 annually, plus performance bonuses. Health, dental, and a discretionary expense account for investigation purposes. Victoria nearly choked. $300,000? Is that insufficient? I can negotiate higher if your services warrant it. No, it's just... Victoria stared at the contract, hardly believing the numbers printed on the page. 6 months ago, she'd been surviving on ramen and refusing to answer calls from her landlord. Now, she was being offered more money than she'd ever imagined earning. This is more than generous. I don't believe in generosity, Miss Chen. I believe in getting what I pay for. Alexander's voice dropped lower, taking on an edge that made her skin prickle with awareness. I'm buying your complete focus, your undivided loyalty, and your absolute discretion. The compensation reflects the value I place on those qualities. Victoria signed the contract before she could second-guess herself, her hand trembling slightly as she wrote her name. When she looked up, Alexander was watching her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe properly. Welcome to Meridian Financial, Ms. Chen. He extended his hand, and when she took it, his fingers lingered against hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Have a feeling this partnership is going to be very interesting indeed. As Victoria shook his hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just signed much more than an employment contract. She'd entered into something far more dangerous and infinitely more complicated than a simple business arrangement. The game, whatever it was, had officially begun. 2 weeks into her employment at Meridian Financial, Victoria had established a routine that would have impressed a Swiss clockmaker. She arrived at 7:30, reviewed overnight market reports, and spent her days buried in financial records. That painted an increasingly disturbing picture of systematic client poaching. Her temporary office on the 28th floor had become a war room. Walls covered with client timelines, financial projections, and a growing web of connections that pointed toward someone with intimate knowledge of Meridian's strategies. The pattern was too precise to be coincidental, too sophisticated to be outside work. Working late again? Victoria looked up from her laptop to find Alexander standing in her doorway. His tie loosened and his shirt sleeves rolled up in a way that should have been illegal in professional settings. It was past 9 p.m., and the building had grown quiet except for the hum of cleaning crews and the distant sounds of the city below. "The Singapore account," Victoria replied, gesturing at her screen. "Their departure doesn't fit the pattern. They left 2 days before the competitor even made contact, not after. Like they knew what was coming." Alexander stepped into her office, closing the door behind him with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the empty building. "Show me." Victoria's breath caught as he moved behind her chair, leaning over to examine her laptop screen. His proximity sent her pulse into overdrive, his cologne mixing with something uniquely him that made it difficult to focus on anything except the warmth radiating from his body. "Here," she managed, pointing at the timeline with a finger that trembled slightly. Robert Wu's account was worth $43 million. No complaints about service, excellent returns, solid relationship with James from the Hong Kong office. Then suddenly he transfers everything to Hamilton and Associates 2 days before they even approach him. Alexander's hand settled on the back of her chair, his fingers close enough to brush her shoulder. Someone warned him. More than that. Victoria clicked to another screen, hyper-aware of how his breathing had shifted when she moved. Look at the timing. Wu's transfer initiated at 2:47 p.m. Hong Kong time. It's 2:47 a.m. here in New York. Who has access to client files at that hour? Night security has read-only access. Margaret keeps her own hours, but she's been with the company since my father started it. Alexander paused, his voice dropping lower. The executive team has full access around the clock. Victoria twisted in her chair to look at him, a mistake. That brought their faces within inches of each other. She could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, the slight shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his lips parted slightly when he realized how close they were. "Alexander," she whispered, not sure if she was warning him or inviting him. "Victoria." Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a curse combined. The moment stretched between them, electric and dangerous, until Alexander's phone buzzed. With an incoming message, he straightened abruptly, checking the screen with a frown that transformed his features back into their familiar mask of control. "Emergency board meeting," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "My father's called an emergency session for tomorrow morning. Your father?" Victoria blinked, trying to shift her mind back to business mode. "I thought he'd retired." "Marcus. Meridian doesn't retire, he just pretends to delegate." Alexander's smile held no warmth. "If he's calling an emergency meeting, someone's told him about our client losses, which means our trader just escalated the situation." Victoria saved. Her work enclosed the laptop, her analytical mind already spinning through possibilities. "Who else knows about my investigation?" "Officially, just me." Alexander moved to the window, staring out at the glittering city lights. "But information has a way of spreading in organizations like this. Secrets don't stay buried long when there's money involved. Then we need to move faster." Victoria stood, straightening her blazer with hands that weren't quite steady. "If your father's involved now, we're running out of time to handle this quietly." Alexander turned back to her, something predatory flickering in his expression. "Quietly was never really an option, Victoria. When you're dealing with betrayal at this level, there's always collateral damage." The words sent a chill down Victoria's spine. "What exactly are you planning to do when we find out who's responsible?" "Whatever's necessary." Alexander's voice carried the cold certainty of someone who'd never had to question his own power. "Meridian Financial is my life's work. I won't let anyone destroy it from within." Victoria studied his face, seeing something in his expression. That made her wonder exactly what she'd gotten herself into. "And if the person responsible is someone you care about?" "I don't care about anyone more than I care about this company." The words came out flat, emotionless. But Victoria caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested the statement wasn't as true as he wanted it to be. "Everyone cares about someone, Alexander, do they?" He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "What about you, Victoria?" What do you care about more than your career? The question felt like a test, but Victoria couldn't decipher what answer he was looking for. I care about the truth, about doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. How admirably naive. Alexander's smile didn't reach his eyes. We'll see how long that idealism lasts once you understand what we're really dealing with. Before Victoria could ask what he meant, Alexander was moving toward the door, his moment of vulnerability buried beneath layers of corporate armor. Go home, Victoria. Get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be complicated. Alexander, wait. Victoria caught his arm as he reached for the door handle, the contact sending sparks up her arm. What aren't you telling me? For a moment, his mask slipped, revealing something that looked almost like regret. More than you know, Victoria? Much more than you know? He left her standing in her office, surrounded by evidence of betrayal and conspiracy, with the unsettling feeling that she was missing something crucial. Something that would change everything once she found it. Outside her window, the city, sprawled in all directions, 10 million people living their lives in blissful ignorance of the games played in towers like this one. Victoria envied them their simplicity. She had a feeling that by tomorrow night nothing would ever be simple. Again, as she gathered her things to leave, Victoria's laptop chimed with a new email notification. The sender was an encrypted account she didn't recognize, and the subject line made her blood run cold. Stop digging, or you'll bury yourself. Victoria stared at the message, her pulse hammering as the implications sank in. Someone knew exactly what she was doing. Someone was watching her every move, that someone wanted her to disappear. The Meridian financial boardroom felt like a mausoleum at 8 a.m. All polished mahogany and solemn portraits of financial titans who'd built their fortunes on other people's dreams. Victoria sat at the far end of the massive table, laptop open, but forgotten as she watched the family drama unfold in real time. Marcus Meridian commanded the room's attention even at 72, his silver hair perfectly styled and his navy suit cut with the same precision as his son's. But where Alexander radiated controlled intensity, Marcus projected the comfortable authority of someone who'd never doubted his own power. The Singapore situation was handled poorly, Marcus was saying, his voice carrying the slight rasp of age and too many cigars. Wu was one of our most stable accounts. Losing him suggests systemic problems in our Hong Kong operations. Alexander sat 2 seats down from his father, his expression carefully neutral. The loss was unfortunate, but not unprecedented given current market conditions. Current market conditions don't explain 30% client attrition in 6 months. Marcus's pale eyes swept the table, cataloging reactions from the assembled executives. Someone wants to tell me what's really happening here. Victoria felt the weight of expectations settle on her shoulders. This was why Alexander had brought her to the meeting, why he'd introduced her as a strategic consultant brought in to analyze market trends. The official story was Thosh was to sit in on executive discussions while hiding her real purpose. Miss Chen, Marcus continued, his gaze settling on her with unsettling intensity. You've been reviewing our recent performance. What's your assessment? Victoria glanced at Alexander, who gave her the slightest nod. They'd rehearsed this, planned exactly how much truth to reveal without exposing the investigation. But the threatening email from last night had changed everything. Someone in this room knew exactly why she was here. The client departures show a pattern. Victoria began carefully. The timing suggests advanced knowledge of competitive offers. Someone with access to our strategic planning is sharing information with Hamilton and Associates. A ripple of tension moved around the table. James Morrison from the Hong Kong office shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sarah Chen, no relation despite sharing Victoria's surname, leaned forward with sharp interest. David Park from operations maintained his poker face, but Victoria caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Industrial espionage is a serious accusation, Marcus said slowly. Do you have evidence to support this theory? Victoria opened her laptop, projecting the timeline she'd spent weeks building onto the room's massive screen. Client names, departure dates, competitive offers, all connected by lines that painted a picture of systematic betrayal. The pattern is too precise to be coincidental. Look at the Yamamoto account. Victoria highlighted the relevant section. They received an offer from Hamilton that directly countered our proposal, using language nearly identical to our internal strategy documents. Same with the Melbourne Group, the Vancouver Fund, all of them. Someone's been very busy, Sarah, Chen observed, her tone suggesting she was less surprised than she should have been. Victoria continued her presentation, walking through months of evidence while watching faces around the table. Most showed appropriate concern mixed with professional calculation. But one person wasn't paying attention to the screen at all. James Morrison was staring directly at Alexander, and the expression on his face made Victoria's blood freeze. It wasn't surprise or concern or even fear, it was disappointment. The look of someone whose carefully laid plans had just been exposed. The look of someone who'd been caught. James, Alexander said quietly, following Victoria's gaze. Something you'd like to share? James Morrison had been with Meridian Financial for 8 years, climbing from junior analyst to head of Asian operations through a combination of talent and unwavering loyalty. Victoria had reviewed his personnel file dozens of times, finding nothing that suggested divided allegiances. But now, faced with Alexander's direct question and a room full of eyes boring into him, James's carefully maintained composure cracked like ice in the sun. You want to know what I'd like to share? James stood up so abruptly his chair rolled backward, hitting the wall with a sharp crack. I'd like to share that I've spent the last 2 years watching this company treat its employees like disposable assets while the Meridian family counts money like dragons hoarding gold. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from concern to something much more dangerous. Mr. Morrison, I suggest you choose your next words very carefully, or what? You'll fire me? James laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. I'm already gone, Marcus. Have been for months. The only question was whether I'd leave quietly or take some of your precious clients with me. The confession hit the room like a physical blow. Victoria felt her chest tighten as the implications sank in. Months of investigation, weeks of building trust with Alexander. And the answer had been sitting at the conference table the entire time. Hamilton and Associates offered me something you never could, James continued, his voice gaining strength. As he spoke, respect, partnership, a future that doesn't depend on kissing. Meridian ring every morning and pretending to be grateful for scraps. Alexander's face had gone completely white, but his voice remained steady. How long, James? 6 months of active intelligence sharing. 2 years of growing tired of your family's arrogance. James pulled out his phone, holding it up like a weapon. Every strategy session I attended, every client meeting, every confidential document I had access to, Hamilton has it all. You son of a bitch. David Parkhalf rose from his chair, his face flushed with anger. We trusted you. We were friends. Friends don't ask friends to smile while being systematically undervalued and overlooked for promotion. James's gaze swept the table, lingering on each face. How many of you have sat in your offices wondering when you'd get the recognition you deserve? How many have watched the Meridian family make decisions that affect your lives without bothering to ask your opinion? Victoria found herself studying the other faces around the table, seeing the uncomfortable recognition in several expressions. James wasn't just a traitor. He was a mirror reflecting frustrations that others shared but hadn't acted on. This is fascinating psychology, James, Marcus said with deceptive calm. But it doesn't change the fact that you've committed corporate espionage on a massive scale. We're talking about criminal charges, personal lawsuits, destruction of your professional reputation. James smiled, and there was something almost pitying in the expression. You think I didn't plan for that? You think Hamilton offered my partnership without guaranteeing protection? He gestured toward Victoria. Your little investigation was always going to find me eventually? I've been ready for this conversation for weeks. Ready how? Alexander's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but the menace in it made everyone in the room go still, ready with insurance. James reached into his briefcase, extracting a tablet that he placed on the table like a gauntlet.
3
Years of recorded conversations, documented policy decisions, evidence of market manipulation that would make federal investigators very interested in Meridian Financial's business practices. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria felt her pulse hammering as she realized the true scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just corporate betrayal. It was warfare. You recorded private conversations? Sarah Chen's voice cracked with disbelief. Documented everything. James's confidence was unshakable now, fed by the shock and fear he saw reflected around the table. Every borderline illegal strategy, every client manipulation, every time. Someone in this room decided that rules were suggestions rather than requirements. Marcus Meridian stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. Mr. Morrison, you have 30 seconds to collect your personal belongings and leave this building. Security will escort you out. I don't think so. James picked up his tablet, cradling it like a shield. I think I'll leave when I'm ready. With the severance package, my lawyers have already negotiated with your legal department. 18 months salary, full benefits, and a very carefully worded non-disclosure agreement that works both ways. We don't negotiate with blackmailers, Alexander said, finally finding his voice. James looked at him with something that might have been genuine sadness. No, Alexander, you just create them. The silence that followed felt like the pause between lightning and thunder, pregnant with the promise of destruction. Victoria sat frozen, watching years of professional relationships disintegrate in real time. Then James Morrison walked out of the boardroom, taking with him not just Meridian Financial's secrets, but any illusion Victoria might have had about the nature of the world she'd entered. As the door closed behind him, Marcus Meridian turned to his son with eyes like winter storms. Well, Alexander, it seems your consultant has been quite effective. Now what do you propose we do about it? Victoria realized with crystalline clarity that she was no longer investigating a corporate betrayal. She was sitting in the middle of a war zone, and the battle was just beginning. The Meridian Financial building felt different at midnight, transformed from a temple of commerce into something more intimate and dangerous. Victoria stood in Alexander's office, watching him pace behind his desk like a caged predator, his perfect composure finally cracking after hours of damage control. 3 clients pulled their accounts today, he said without looking at her. 2 more are asking for meetings to reassess their portfolios. James's little performance this morning is going to cost us everything we've spent months trying to save. Victoria had spent the day fielding calls from panicked investors, crafting carefully worded statements, and watching Alexander's empire slowly hemorrhage money and credibility. The confrontation with James had been just the beginning. News of Meridian Financial's internal problems was spreading through New York's financial community like wildfire. Hamilton and Associates released a statement this afternoon. Victoria said quietly, they're officially welcoming James as a senior partner and announcing expanded Asian market operations. They're not even trying to hide what they've done. Alexander stopped pacing, his hands gripping the back of his leather chair with enough force to whiten his knuckles. My father wants to sue James personally, freeze his assets, and make him radioactive in the industry. Scorched earth warfare. You don't agree? I don't see the point in destroying someone who's already destroyed us. Alexander finally looked at her, and Victoria felt her heart clench at the exhaustion she saw in his green eyes. James was right about one thing. We created this situation through our own arrogance. Victoria moved closer, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully understand. You're not your father, Alexander. You don't have to handle this the same way he would. Don't. Alexander's laugh was bitter. Meridian Financial is built on reputation, on the belief that we're invincible. If we show weakness now, if we let James walk away without consequences, we'll lose everything anyway. Or you could choose a different path. Victoria reached out, her fingers brushing his hand where it gripped the chair. You could admit that. The company made mistakes, implement real changes, rebuild trust through transparency instead of intimidation. Alexander stared down at their joined hands, his expression unreadable. You're suggesting I dismantle everything my family has built for 15 years, suggesting you build something better. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Then Alexander's phone buzzed with an incoming message, and his expression hardened as he read the screen. James, he said simply, showing Victoria the text, wants to meet. Private conversation, just the 2 of us. Victoria felt ice form in her stomach. That's obviously a trap. Obviously. Alexander was already reaching for his jacket, his movements sharp with renewed purpose, which is why you're not coming with me. Like hell I'm not. Victoria grabbed her purse, matching his stride, toward the door. I started this investigation, Alexander. I'm seeing it through to the end. Victoria, you don't understand what you're dealing with here. This isn't just corporate politics anymore. Then explain it to me. Victoria caught his arm, forcing him to stop and look at her.
Stop protecting me from information I need to do.
My job. Alexander studied her face for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. James Morrison isn't just a disgruntled employee, Victoria. He was my best friend. My best man at my wedding 3 years ago. The person I trusted more than anyone outside my family. The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. Alexander had been married and trusted James enough to stand beside him on the most important day of his life. The betrayal went deeper than corporate espionage. It was personal in ways that made Victoria's chest ache with sympathy. Your wedding, she repeated softly. Alexander, I had no idea. My wife died in a car accident 18 months ago. Alexander's voice remained steady, but Victoria caught the slight tremor beneath the words. James was the only person who understood what that loss meant to me. He helped me through the worst period of my life, and I thought he understood why I threw myself into work afterward. Victoria felt her world shift, pieces of Alexander's behavior suddenly making terrible sense. The cold control, the focus on the company above all else, the way he'd claimed not to care about anyone. He wasn't naturally heartless, was protecting himself from another devastating loss. He saw your grief as abandonment, Victoria said softly, understanding flooding through her. He thought you were choosing the company over your relationships. Maybe I was. Alexander's admission was barely audible. Maybe I was so terrified of losing anyone else that I decided not to let anyone close enough to matter. The vulnerability in his voice broke something open in Victoria's chest. Without thinking, she stepped closer, her hands framing his face with gentle pressure. That's not living, Alexander. It's just surviving. I know. His eyes closed, leaning into her touch, like a man dying of thirst. But surviving was all I could manage, until what? Alexander's eyes opened, meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Until a woman threw coffee on me and reminded me what it felt like to feel something other than emptiness. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to build. Victoria felt her pulse hammering against her throat as Alexander's hands settled at her waist, drawing her closer with movements that felt inevitable and terrifying. This is complicated, she whispered, even as her body betrayed her by melting into his touch. Everything worthwhile is complicated. Alexander's voice was rough with emotion, held too long in check. The question is whether you're brave enough to want something complicated. Before Victoria could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message, then another. Alexander's phone joined the chorus, both devices lighting up with urgent notifications. That shattered the moment between them. Victoria read her screen and felt the blood drain from her face. James just sent the recordings to the Financial Times. All of them. Alexander was scanning his own messages, his expression growing darker with each notification. Securities and Exchange Commission, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Justice. He looked up at Victoria with eyes that had gone completely cold. James didn't just betray the company. He's trying to destroy it completely. The next few hours passed in a blur of crisis management and legal consultations. Victoria found herself in conference rooms filled with lawyers who spoke in careful euphemisms about federal investigations and potential criminal charges. The recordings James had released painted Meridian Financial as a company that routinely skirted legal boundaries in pursuit of profit. By dawn, the story was dominating financial news cycles. Meridian Financial's stock price had crashed, clients were fleeing in droves, and federal investigators were requesting extensive documentation of the company's business practices. Victoria stood in Alexander's office as the sun rose over Manhattan, watching him stare out at the city that had once seemed to belong to him. His empire was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing either of them could do to stop it. "I should resign," Alexander said, without turning around. "Take responsibility. Try to minimize the damage to everyone else who works here. You should fight." Victoria moved to stand beside him, her reflection joining his in the window glass. "Not the way your father would fight, with lawyers and threats and intimidation. Fight by proving that the company can be better than its past mistakes." Alexander turned to look at her, something fragile and hopeful flickering in his expression. "You really believe that's possible?" "I believe you're capable of things you haven't even imagined yet." Victoria reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I believe that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to us forces us to become the person we were always meant to be. And what if that person isn't strong enough to save what matters most?" Victoria squeezed his hand, drawing on reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed. "Then we'll build something new, something better, something that can't be destroyed by one person's betrayal because it's built on truth instead of secrets." Alexander studied her face, seeing something there that made his expression shift from despair to determination. "Are you suggesting we start our own firm?" "I'm suggesting we start our lives over, together, and see what we're capable of when we're not afraid of losing what we have." Victoria smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months despite the chaos surrounding them. "After all, you already know I'm good in a crisis. I threw coffee on my future business partner and somehow convinced him to hire me." Alexander's laugh was genuine this time, the sound washing away the last vestiges of the cold mask he'd worn for so long. "Victoria Chen, you are going to be the death of me, or the making of you." Victoria rose on her toes, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that tasted like coffee and possibility and the promise of complicated, beautiful things to come. When they broke apart, the sun was fully risen over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber that made everything look like a new beginning. Outside the window, 10 million people were starting their days, most of them unaware that two lives had just changed forever in a corner office high above the city. 6 months later, known Meridian Financial Consulting opened its doors in a modest suite of offices in Brooklyn, specializing in ethical investment strategies and transparent client relationships. Their first client was a small nonprofit that wanted to invest its endowment responsibly. Their 50th was a Fortune 500 company that had heard about their innovative approach to sustainable growth. James Morrison never contacted them again. Though Victoria occasionally saw his name in industry publications, Hamilton and Associates had suffered its own scandal when James's recordings revealed their role in systematic corporate espionage, and his partnership there had ended as abruptly as it had begun. Marcus Meridian had eventually forgiven his son for choosing love over legacy, though it had taken several months and Victoria's homemade Christmas cookies to fully win him over. He now served as an occasional consultant to their firm, offering wisdom earned through decades of success and failure. On their first anniversary as business partners in 6 months, as something much more personal, Alexander found Victoria in their shared office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline with a coffee cup in her hands. "Planning to throw that at anyone today?" he asked, sliding his arms around her waist from behind. "Only if they deserve it." Victoria leaned back against his chest, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "Though I have to say, throwing coffee at you was the best mistake I ever made." "Mistake?" Alexander pressed a kiss to her temple, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Miss Chen, I'm beginning to think that coffee incident was the most calculated business decision in corporate history." Victoria turned in his arms, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "You'll never prove it, Mr. Meridian." "I don't need to prove it," Alexander smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "I just need to be grateful for it every day for the rest of my life." As they kissed in their sunlit office, surrounded by the business they'd built together from the ashes of betrayal and loss, Victoria reflected on the strange turns life could take. Sometimes the worst thing that could happen turned out to be exactly what you needed to become who you were always meant to be. Sometimes throwing coffee on a stranger was really throwing coffee on your future, and sometimes the most complicated, Love stories were the ones most worth telling. The end asterisk, like this video if the story touched your heart. Subscribe for more emotional tales and share with someone who believes in the power of true love. And let us know in the comments. Connecting with our global community of romance lovers,